Welcome, everyone. My name is Natalie Kleber, and I am the Middle and High School Literacy PD Specialist here at the Louisiana Department of Education. And welcome to our new series on middle and high school literacy teacher professional development. So this is session one, an introduction to the science of reading. So we have three objectives today. By the end of the session, you should be able to define the science of reading and how it applies specifically to grades 6 through 12. Identify the strands of Scarborough's reading rope and how they contribute to fluent readers. And then lastly, describe how knowledge of the rope can elevate your content area lessons. So what is the science of reading and how does it apply to middle and high school? The science of reading, very generally, is research that details how children learn how to read and how to address the challenges related to reading and writing if they can't. Recent NAEP data, 2020 NAEP data, said that 66% of 8th grade students fell below the proficient level in their ability to comprehend the meaning of text at their grade level. So there's a couple of implications, things that are affected by this. And one of them is that the majority of middle and high school teachers are not trained on teaching children how to read, and they're not equipped to help struggling readers. We assume by middle school that they have already gotten whatever reading and instruction they need, and they should come to us proficient readers, but we know that that's not always the case. Also, content area text at the middle and high level are increasingly complex, and students struggle to extract meaning from those texts. Even proficient readers struggle to pull meaning from those texts. And so if students are struggling to read in general, this becomes even more difficult. So there was a study the Reading League did to define what is the science of reading. And so they came up with a definition. The science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. And so the science of reading is a series of research that has been done over the last 5 decades. And it studied how people learned how to read, what is happening on a cognitive level in the brain of how people learn how to read. And if we can understand how people learn how to read, then we can combat any problems that they're having along the way. It helps us to better understand what can we do as a result if there was a breakdown somewhere. So for studies to be considered scientifically based research, they must have these three things. They must be experimental and quasi-experimental, have detailed description of study methods to allow for replication or refinement of the findings, and they must be published in a peer-reviewed journal. This is not something that somebody just came up with, like I said, in a day. It's something that has been studied for decades with a lot of brains, and we're going to talk about the different disciplines that went into figuring this out. So just more on defining the science of reading. This research has been conducted over the last 5 decades, like I said, across the world. And it's derived from thousands of studies conducted in multiple languages. The science of reading has culminated in a preponderance of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop, why some have difficulty, and how we can most effectively assess and teach and therefore improve student outcomes through prevention of and intervention for reading difficulties. And it's derived, like I said, from multiple fields. So these are some of the fields that went into the science of reading: cognitive psychology, communication sciences, developmental psychology, education, implementation science, linguistics, neuroscience, school psychology. All of these people had a say and a voice in the research and these thousands of studies that determined how students read. It just wasn't a teacher or a few teachers or professors that defined this. So it is equally important, now that we define what the science of reading is for us to have an idea of what science of reading is not, if we're to truly understand it. So the science of reading is not an ideology or physiology or philosophy, excuse me. It's not a fad or a trend or a new idea or a pendulum swing. Sometimes in education, we see, okay, here's something new. That's not what the science of reading is. It's not a political agenda. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We know what the end game is, but this is going to look different for different students. a program. It's not a program of instruction. There's not one program that you can implement that gives you everything you need about the science of reading. And it's not a single specific component of instruction, such as phonics. It's a lot of different things. We're going to talk about what some of those things are that go into understanding the science of reading. So this is an infographic by Goff and Tumner, and then later by Hoover and Goff had the same ideas as well. And it says that this is the simple view of reading, which is a little ironic because nothing about reading is simple, but they're saying that decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. If we have those two things, then students will be able to read and comprehend what they're reading. And so decoding, we're not as familiar with in the middle and high school level, but decoding is the ability to apply sound symbol relationships to read words. So the letter S, the symbol for the S makes the sound when you're reading. And you take that from letters and individual phonemes and graphemes into a series of letters. We start to have blends that make up certain sounds and then into words. And so that's the decoding component. And then if we multiply that times language comprehension, which is the ability to understand spoken language. So that's me talking to you that might be having some things to do with dialect or irony when you're speaking to somebody, tone, a certain tone that somebody's using. If somebody doesn't understand tone and you say it a certain way, then somebody might understand what's happening in that scenario. And so the simple view of reading is an equation that has the multiplication sign in it. And so if we're lacking one of those, if one of those becomes 0 and we multiply it times the other, then reading comprehension doesn't happen. And so, like I said, we're hoping in middle and high school that the majority of or all of the students we're hoping would have the decoding component, but some of them don't. And we're going to talk in some later parts of the series about what can be done if students are missing the decoding component. But something we really live in the middle and high school area is the language comprehension. And we're going to get into more of that too. This part helps us understand part of how people learn how to read. So here's another infographic by Hollis Scarborough, and it's Scarborough's reading rope. And she says that there's two main strands, language comprehension and word recognition, which is very similar. If you notice, decoding is under here as well to the previous infographic that we studied, and these were done independently of each other. These strands are woven and they create skilled readers as kids become increasingly strategic inside of language comprehension. And as they become increasingly automatic in their word recognition, the ability to recognize words and understand what they're saying, they become skilled readers. And so there are some things that we do in middle and high school in the lower strand, the word recognition strand, such as morphological awareness does help with sight recognition of familiar words and phonological awareness, but the majority of the work that we can continue to develop in the middle and high school area usually focuses on that upper strand, the background knowledge, the vocabulary, the language structure. We're going to get more into those in just a second, but I wanted just to show you where the focus would be for understanding how students read at this level and developing that for everybody. So the language comprehension strand consists of 5 main areas. Background knowledge is facts and concepts, and this lives in all of the content areas that we studied about. Definitely for sure in science and social studies, but even in English language arts now, a lot of or most of the units have at least some part of informational text in there. And then math, of course, is embedded in facts and concepts. Vocabulary is big in all of the content areas. If students don't understand and comprehend the vocabulary that pertains to that particular content area, there's going to be a lack of understanding and comprehension there for sure. Language structure is syntax and semantics. It's how punctuation is used. It's how sentences are set up. Verbal reasoning is that inference and that metaphor component to stories. Like I was saying, if we're talking and I'm hoping that you understand the inference that I'm trying to make, that's my verbal reasoning skills. And sometimes, a lot of times, our middle school and high school students can be lacking that component. Then there's literacy knowledge, the knowledge of prints and genres. It's the knowledge that narratives are written and understood in a different way than an informational text is written and interpreted and comprehended. Then the lower strand consists of these 3 areas: phonological awareness, which is syllables and phonemes, those sounds. In the middle and high school level, we don't know what phonemes are. So phonemes are the sounds that we hear from the different letters or series of letters. Decoding is the alphabetic principle, spelling sound correspondences. And then sight recognition is the ability to see a word and become familiarized with it. And this is definitely something that we can work on in middle and high school. The more familiar the children and students become with the words, the more they're able to recognize them on sight and build fluency and understanding inside of those words. So becoming a skilled reader, I said if we had these two strands and we become more proficient, we become skilled readers. So let's talk about how we become skilled readers. So as the strands associated with word recognition become increasingly automatic, we are doing them more and more frequently. And the strands associated with the language comprehension become increasingly strategic. We're pulling from the brain kind of quickly, strategically on how to understand that language comprehension. They weave together to reflect skilled reading. And this is when the fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension happens. Okay. As students become skilled readers, they're able to read and meaningfully engage with these complex texts. So, we have a lot of student-led activities in classrooms, which are fantastic, such as, Socratic seminars or fishbowl discussions. But in order for students to truly participate and get something out of those, they have to be able to read and meaningfully engage in those texts or with those texts so that they can extract something from them and form their own opinions. There are struggles with if there are struggles with any of the strands within the rope, this will inhibit a student's movement to skilled reading. And so as educators, if we understand what the components of the ropes are and we notice, either through the students reading in class or having these discussions or writing, if we notice that, hey, one of these pieces of the rope isn't as strong, there are some small teacher moves that we can do to help improve their proficiency and help them to become more skilled readers just inside of our content areas. So let's talk about some implications for the content areas. Until students are skilled readers, they're not able to read and comprehend the information from the different content areas. So although as a science teacher, I'm not a reading teacher, or although as a social studies teacher, I'm not a reading teacher, I still have to help the students read and comprehend within my content area, within my discipline. And so there are little things like understanding those pieces of the rope, like I said, that if we understand that and we're able to manipulate that, we can help them to understand and comprehend our different content areas. You do not have to be a reading teacher or spend a lot of time creating activities to help build skilled readers within your discipline. On the next slide or two, we're going to talk about what are some different, very little time that you have to invest in order to help build competency with that. It's just being aware of it. It's understanding where the breakdown might occur so that they can become skilled readers within your discipline. Integrating the science of reading into your current lessons is as easy as asking yourself what teacher moves you can make in different strands of the rope that will help students read and comprehend the material better. So here are some teacher moves that you can implement that are just really easy. And this is a very brief list. There are tons and tons of things that you can do. We're going to explore those more in the other sessions of this series. But this is just to kind of get your brain thinking about what might this look like. So something as simple in that upper strand in the language comprehension strand, we have that vocabulary rope, and providing vocabulary practice prior to starting a section or a unit, either through a list of words and definitions or using a program such as Quizlet, can really help develop their vocabulary and becoming skilled readers. If there is vocabulary heavy material that they're reading, and this is definitely going to happen inside of the content areas, they're not going to be able to read and comprehend if they don't understand those words. This academic vocabulary that's often embedded is not something they can use context clues to figure out. As well as if you're servicing special populations such as English language learners or special education students, they're missing the pieces to do that. And so preloading the lesson with these things is a part of the rope that can help them to understand and comprehend better. Quizlet even has the little cards where you can put the term on one side with a picture and then the definition on the back side. And this is something that you can upload in Google Classroom, have them study just on their own, just to become more familiar before you dive into the reading material. Another idea for a teacher move is allowing students early access to the text with a read aloud version if possible. A lot of curriculum offer now this functionality of the read aloud. And this allows students to hear hear the material and then track it with their eyes or their fingers so they can become more familiar with those words, building their fluency and building their ability to see that word, build their sight recognition, and understand that word as they see it in future text or in that text again when you read it in class together. Another idea is either before or after a whole class read aloud of the text, allowing students to partner read the section to build their fluency and understanding. And as content area teachers, we don't have 45, 50 minutes for this to happen, but maybe you're looking at that text and you notice, oh goodness, on page 12, there's 2 paragraphs. And if they really can understand these 2 paragraphs, they're really going to get the big idea of this chapter or the big idea of this unit. And so picking that section out to have them partner read ahead of time can be really powerful, again, in building that fluency, building that sight recognition, and building their understanding and comprehension. It builds the students' capacity to do this without you and not telling them, because we often know, I tell my students all the time, when I talk, sometimes they hear the Charlie Brown teacher, won't. So they don't want us just to front load and tell them everything they need to know. It doesn't build their capacity, their skill to understand and to read better. But these teacher moves can help do that. So one last idea just for today's purposes is offering a paired or a lower level text that allows students to build their background knowledge on a topic before reading the curricula-based text. A lot of the tier 1 curricula are written at a very high level, and the expectation is that the students read that, and they need to. But a lot of times, if we can pair it with a lower level text before they get to that upper level text, then you can build their knowledge, their background knowledge, which is again a piece of the rope, in order to help them better understand the more complex text. And there's lots of ways that you can do that, but just, as a warm up before maybe having them read, or maybe as an extra credit opportunity before the next class, before the class that follows that, and having them and rewarding them and building the motivation to do these kinds of things and helping them to see the rewards. Every student wants to be proficient in what they're doing. And a lot of students who have lost or haven't fully developed, I don't want to say lost, they haven't fully developed their reading ability, don't even want to read by middle and high school. They've completely checked out. They think they're not good at it. They don't want to have to do it because they don't want to experience that failure again. So how powerful it is, with just the little training that we're giving to be able to understand, like I said, the science of reading and how people learn to read, and then helping with these little pieces to help students become more proficient so that we can build their proficiency and build their motivation and belief in themselves so that they can comprehend, our content area information better. It's very powerful. So here are some final thoughts. Develop your understanding of the nuances of the code of the science of reading. This will help you diagnose, and it helps adjust instruction as needed at the middle and the high school level. Like I said, there's little things that you can do. If you see tomorrow's lesson, you're like, oh goodness, the students could really use just this little piece and me adding to the lesson. It becomes very powerful. When planning your daily lessons, consider what these teacher moves are, like I said, that you can add that support students in an area of language comprehension, that upper strand especially. If you're required to or have the ability to do small group instruction, group students homogeneously and present the materials while focusing on one of the strands. So this is probably typically going to only happen in English language arts classroom in the middle or high level. I'm sure you don't have a lot of small groups happening within literacy in your other content areas. But if you do have one in your ELA block, then group the students by ability. Take the very lowest in that strand, group them together, and work on one little skill at a time. And you're going to see how powerful it becomes and how fast the students move and catch on and start building their capacity to become fluent readers who read and comprehend. So I want you to reflect on your curriculum or your current lessons that you have coming up. And I want you to ask yourself these 2 questions. How can your knowledge of the science of reading elevate these lessons? Just knowing what the science of reading is, what it's comprised of, how can it elevate your future lessons? And then the second question I want you to ask yourself is, what is one thing you can implement that will build students' capacity within your content area using the science of reading? So if you have any questions or suggestions at all, you can contact us at louisianaliteracy@la.gov or me directly, natalie.kleber@la.gov. And I welcome any and all of your suggestions or questions or comments. Like I said, I know that the science of reading isn't something that we're versed in middle and high school, but becoming aware of it is really going to help build your students' proficiency. It's going to help you feel better about them understanding your content areas better. And then lastly, just be on the lookout for the future sessions coming, because now that you have your overall understanding of the science of reading, we're going to dip into the different strands and talk about what are some explicit actions that can help you build students' proficiency within those strands. So thank you so much for tuning in.